do go there for 11:40 and get involved. If not, then stick around for... Can you guess who's talking now? Yeah, nice. Another person who needs no introduction, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So Jimmy Song is a peer-to-peer coin developer, educator, and small to medium-sized bookstore. He's often seen carrying around a large rucksack of books ranging from the Little Bitcoin book. Thank God, these are books, by the way, so please don't call out Bitcoin against me. So the Little Bitcoin book, Thank God for Bitcoin, Bitcoin and the American Dream, and my personal favorite, Fiat Ruins Everything. Jimmy has been a lecturer at the University of Texas, an expert witness in legal cases involving the coin, and he's an advisor to multiple companies in the rogue money space. Jimmy also writes a weekly newsletter, The Coin Tech Talk, and he has a podcast called Peer-to-Peer Cash Fixes This. We're good? Okay. Jimmy, I don't know what the title of your keynote is today, but please come to the stage and please... Oh, it's called Destroying Rent Seeking. Is that right? Fantastic. Please give him a round of applause. Do you want this or this? This. There you go.
And let's see. I think this will good. All right. All right. Good to see everybody. I'm going to move around because this shadow I find a little creepy. So I just don't want to be around that. But my talk today is called Destroying Rent Seeking. It's a new talk. I haven't given this one before, so please be patient if I ramble or something like that. I wanted to give this talk here in Africa because this is a major problem. Rent seeking, I believe, has been very detrimental to a lot of the countries here, to a lot of the people here. And I wanted to point that out, and I wanted to talk about it in a way that hopefully makes more sense. Anyway, the talk is called Destroying Rent Seeking and Reviving Civilization, because what I believe is happening is that fiat money has enabled rent seeking to such a degree that all of the value is essentially being captured by the 1%, the people at the top, the people that know how to play the political game rather than the people that are actually providing the value, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start. What is rent seeking? So if you're not familiar with this term, it's this idea that you're involved in some sort of transaction, either between two people or with yourself or something like that, and somebody comes in and collects some sort of tax without providing any value. So this is an example, right? Like you put a chain over some river and say, you can't cross until you pay me, right? It's more like extortion than anything else. And you know that person that does that doesn't add any value, right? They're not actually pushing the boat or anything. They're not really adding value to anybody, but they are collecting rent and they are able to get rich off of it. And this is considered sort of prestigious in some cases and very steady work and so on. But this is what destroys civilization. So here are some examples of rent seeking. So taxes, this is a big and major category, but all manner of taxes essentially get in between people that want to transact and collect money that without adding any value, right? There's also sort of permission, right? Licensing, things like that, where oftentimes there's no reason why they should that a particular profession should need a license, but that's something that oftentimes the government or industrial bodies or whatever sort of use for rent seeking. Gatekeeping, this happens a lot in a lot of places where you're not allowed to do something until you pass certain exams or know certain people, something like that. And this ends up adding a lot of compliance requirements. If you want to start a company that does X, you need to do this, 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 and this first. And all of this essentially enriches somebody else, enriches some bureaucrat or some government or somebody that is not adding value. And every time you have stuff where somebody is not adding value, you're destroying value. You're adding taxes. You're capturing the value, and it doesn't add to civilization. So we're going to look at different levels of rent seeking. First, we're going to look at company level rent seeking. There's a lot of companies that get to enjoy the benefits of rent seeking. There's government level rent seeking, and that certainly happens quite a bit. You've already seen a couple of examples of that. And then at the world level, there's also even more rent seeking. So let's zoom in. Let's look at company level rent seeking and what that looks like. So there's a lot of that, including stuff like insurance. A lot of insurance is mandatory, right? At least in the US, car and health insurance are required. And if you don't have that, then you can't drive, or you're not going to get certain services, or you'll be fined or something like that. A lot of other countries, this lives one level higher up, where you're sort of paying more in income taxes or something like that, and you get universal health care or something to that effect. There are also subsidies. So housing all over the world is extremely expensive because it gets subsidized, usually through some form of loans that are available to people. University education also gets subsidized through a lot of student loans and things like that. Even things like media get subsidized. The BBC is paid for by the British government. The CBC is paid for by the Canadian government. And at least currently, they're about like the only media organization that's allowed to exist in Canada, because they sort of ban everything else. Then there are monopolies, and these happen quite a bit. A lot of utilities, for example, energy companies, water companies, sometimes like internet companies, even mobile phone companies in places like Lebanon. These are monopolies usually granted by the government to particular favored companies, and they are able to make tremendous amounts of money and charge way more money than would otherwise be normal. There's also all kinds of compliance personnel, law, HR, some sort of expertise that's involved, where you have to get certain certifications to get the right reports so that you can comply with some certain things. These are all company level rent seeking things that are happening all over the economy. And of course, banks. There's investment banks, commercial banks. Even venture capital is a form of a bank. These are the controllers of money. And if you notice something, a lot of these have to do with money, right? And that's not a coincidence, because that is the easiest way to collect some tax or some rent from transactions that would otherwise be happening. So what are the consequences of some of this rent seeking that's happening at the corporate level? Well, first of all, a lot of value is captured. And if you study the companies from La Belle Epoque, right, the golden age, 1870 to 1910, when the world was on the gold standard, it was really common to have dividends that paid 10%. So that means that if you own a stock that's $100, you would get paid $10 just for owning the stock, because that was the part of the profits that were shared with you. But that's no longer the case. The best stocks in the U.S. that pay dividends, they pay at like 1.5%, right? Or they're like highly distressed and they can't pay, or they're not going to pay, but and things like that. So you get a lot of value that's captured by third parties, and that means that profitability is destroyed. And in particular, this can be really bad when you have a very profitable business. A lot of that value gets captured away. So an example of that would be if you have, like, say, a 30% profit margin on a business that's doing very well. What will often happen is somebody will come in and buy that company out using something called a leveraged buyout. So that means that they borrow a ton of money, and especially in a low interest rate environment, they're able to buy the entire company and put the actual loan that they used to buy the company on the company balance sheet. So they have debt service in addition to all of the other operations. So that debt service can take up like 15% of the profits that they make. So instead of a 30% profit margin, it now has shrunk to 15% as a result of debt. And that process continues to happen, and then all these profitable companies become very unprofitable. and soon they become really, they essentially become zombie companies. And they end up playing a lot of financial games to get out of the pickle that they're in, because they load up on debt and they can't afford certain things, so they play more and more financial games. One of the things that I found out during the COVID era was airlines. Now, most people think of airlines as kind of a low margin business or something like that. They're nothing of that kind. They're actually banks. And you might think that's kind of a crazy thing to say, but they are. In 2020, United Airlines wanted to get a loan because obviously COVID destroyed their business and they needed a loan to carry over until people would travel again. So they went to the investment banks and asked for a loan. And usually the investment banks, when they're giving out loans to airlines, they demand some collateral in the form of airplanes, the hard assets or something like that. This time, though, they decided to go in another direction. They said, we want the airline miles program as collateral. So if you are getting a loan against your airline miles program, well, you have to evaluate how much that airline, the miles program is worth. And the United Plus miles program was valued by an investment bank at $22 billion. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but what's really crazy is that at the time, United stock, the market capitalization of that airline was $10 billion, which doesn't make any sense, right? Like, that's kind of like finding out you have a kitchen worth like $500,000 on a house that you bought for $300,000. Like, how is that possible? Well, it means that the rest of the airline is worth negative $12 billion, right? They're actually a bank using airline stuff to discharge the points. And it kind of makes sense after you think about it, because they can issue these miles out of nothing. They are a bank, and they sell all of these miles to credit card companies and like rental car companies and so on. And this is the game that they play. And they can debase the miles and so on. And all of these airlines, they have similar valuations on their miles programs. They're all banks acting as airlines to discharge the miles that, which are essentially debt that they have to pay back. And it's not just airlines. This is happening all over the economy. GMAC Financing figured out many years ago that they made more money, like GM, the company, the car company, they made more money off of loans for the cars themselves than the actual car. This is what happens with rent seeking. You have a lot of financial games. And that induces a deep debt dependence. And all of these companies have a lot of debt on their balance sheet. And this means that they are extremely fragile. So what happens? Well, you get subsidies from the government, and then they become zombie companies. A lot of companies in the economy today are zombie companies. For example, IBM, over the last 20 years, has paid out $180 billion in stock buybacks. Their market cap is $130 billion. What does that tell you? Right? Like this is what's happening. They're all zombies. All right, so that's at the company level. Government level is even worse, right? There's a lot more rent seeking happening at the government level. For example, transaction taxes, sales, payroll, income. These are bilateral transactions, right? It's one person A and person B doing some transaction, whether it's buying something, selling labor, or whatever. A third party comes in called the government, and they collect money without really providing any value. There's also property taxes, real estate, cap gains, sometimes even straight up confiscation. This is just taking your stuff. This is straight up theft, but they're allowed to do it. There's licensing, institutions, professions. You need a license to cut hair in the United States. Does that sound like something that needs licensing? It's there though. And this is a way in which the government rent seeks, right? You have a lot of positions and so on. There's also regulations. TSA, like one of the most annoying things ever, right? Like having to go through security in each of these places. Not much evidence that it's actually stopped terrorist attacks, but it's something that is there and taxes everyone every time they travel. There's also health regulations of all kinds and many other things. And of course, there's tariffs. One of the saddest things I saw while I was traveling was Argentina. If you're trying to buy a MacBook there, it's about 3,000 US dollars worth. But in the US, it's like $1,000. So what's happening? Well, there's tariffs, right? This is how they collect rent off of something that they're not really benefiting anybody with. And of course, the biggest government rent-seeking thing of all is inflation. And this one is particularly bad. It's a form of a property tax, but it's particularly bad because nobody recognizes what the cause is, or they have plausible deniability. It's those greedy companies. It's people hiking up prices for no reason. It's not about the money printing at all. And these are the consequences. Everything becomes political because the government has so much control. It's all about this redistributing. And you see this in a lot of places around the world today. Everything has become extremely political. Compared to 100 years ago, the level of government intrusion in every single place has multiplied by orders of magnitude. And if you look at a place like China, where you have social credit scores and whatnot, it's become really, really bad. And in particular, inflation becomes favored because it's got plausible deniability, and it's a stealth tax. When you have something like a real estate tax, you can't like say, oh, it's some other person or something like that. You're actually doing the tax collecting, so you get all of the blame. But with inflation, you have this plausible deniability. So that becomes the easy way out for most politicians. And development ends up stopping because all of this value is getting captured. So instead of value going to the people that are trading, that are actually providing value to one another, it's going into government bureaucrats, a lot of people that are rent seeking. And ultimately, that means that you either get a static society or one that's going backwards. And I want to share this picture with you. Now, the picture on the left, like what year do you think that is? Yeah, it's about 1970, but it could just as well be like 1980, 1990. I mean, if you change the cars up a little bit, it could be like yesterday. Not much has changed. The one on the right, 1920. The difference between 1920 and 1970 versus 1970 and 2020, I think about it, not that much has changed. What I'm arguing here is that progress has slowed down significantly because of all this rent seeking. Now, there's a global level of rent seeking, and that is due to the dollar hegemony. The dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and the dollar has this special position where they can essentially be in the middle of a lot of different transactions where they're not really adding value. So this is mainly done through the petrodollar. Everyone needs oil, and oil is sold in dollars. So that means that everyone has to sort of save in dollars, and inflation lets the US capture a lot of that value. And in particular, the most nefarious way in which they do that is through the IMF, World Bank, and the Bank of International Settlements. They're able to give these loans out of nothing and essentially put a lot of countries in debt to the United States or other Western countries and capture a lot of the value of that country. If you want to know more details, you can read Alex Gladstein's Hidden Repression. But it's really kind of unconscionable how many countries end up producing palm oil, for example, rather than something to actually build up their country. And this really is due to the exorbitant privilege and the monetary imperialism of the dollar hegemony. And that's something that the US gets to practice, and it's being imitated. The Belt and Road Initiative, the BRICS Alliance, I know South Africa is the S of that. It's all a part of that plan, is to try to imitate what the IMF, World Bank, and BIS do. It's capturing value, it's rent seeking at a global level. So the consequences are that there's a lot of military intervention on the part of the US. And you're starting to see more of the BRICS alliance starting to have some more military intervention. Part of why that happens is because the debt continues no matter who's in charge, right? So if you have a revolution in some place and you say, well, the debt that we owe the IMF, like we're going to not think about because we're going to not pay back because we didn't make those loans, you're not allowed to say that in the global economy. They will cut you off and put all kinds of sanctions on you if you do that. So you naturally get military intervention as a result. This is why borders haven't changed all that much in 100 years. You also get all kinds of cultural imperialism. You get the values of the people with the money sort of spread out to all of the other countries, whether they want them or not. And you get technology restrictions like nuclear, right? Africa is full of uranium. This is one of the most powerful energy sources out there. The fact that we haven't had any nuclear development basically since the 50s, when we got the nuclear submarine. By the way, a nuclear submarine can stay underwater for 18 months without refueling. That's how powerful it is. And because it's underwater, they decided to create a nuclear reactor that used the seawater to cool another thing of water. This is how all nuclear power plants are. But they never progressed past that. Why don't we have nuclear-powered cars or nuclear-powered jets? Because a nuclear-powered car, you wouldn't need to fuel for like 10 years. But we haven't progressed in that direction because there are technology restrictions. There's all kinds of rent-seeking. We could be in a world that's way, way better, but we're not because of the rent-seeking. And this ultimately means that the developing world has a lot more poverty than it really deserves because a lot of the value is being captured by the first world countries. So all of this rent-seeking at all of these levels, what does it do ultimately to us besides stopping the progress of civilization? Well, it has certain effects on people, and you can kind of see it all around you. First of all, there's way more political activism because everything's way more political. There's also a lot more self-serving beliefs because this is how you get power in any sort of political system, is by asserting certain beliefs. So you get a lot of victimhood. And you outsource virtue. So for a lot of people, the act of voting for a policy that they think is compassionate is equivalent to compassion itself, which it's not. But that's how people think of it. And of course, you get a lot of high time preference behavior from people because they want things now, rather than thinking about what would be better 30 years from now. Ultimately, I think this is why we have so many people that are depressed, because they know that the world is kind of crumbling around them. They don't have hope. Thankfully, Bitcoin fixes this. And the people here, the Bitcoin holders, you are part of that. And you could see it because the people that are into Bitcoin, you can see just by the conversations that they have that they are different. And it's very different than, say, the altcoin community, right? Like, you talk to an altcoiner, they're like, oh, there's a party with Snoop Dogg and he's gonna like show his monkey drooling JPEG or something. Instead, it's way more about, okay, well, I'm thinking about like, family and kids and like how we're going to survive as a civilization 50 years from now, stuff like that. And enough Bitcoin holders means that you get a Bitcoin community. And this is one of the more exciting things that's happening around the world. You have places like the Motive project in Peru and Bitcoin Beach in El Salvador and Bitcoin Akazi here. These communities start building up. Right? Instead of rent-seeking, there's no rent-seeking in Bitcoin. You can't tax transactions that you're not a party to. You can be a community. You're providing value. There's no friction there. That leads to Bitcoin countries. Now, we only really have one right now. That's El Salvador. But man, is that place an interesting study. I've been there 4 times in the last 2 years. And about every 6 months I go back, I notice just how much is being built. and how much things are changing. When you unleash people with low time preference, when you have people that have hope, it changes an entire country. And ultimately, I think if you have enough countries, we get on a Bitcoin standard and we rebuild civilization again. Fiat delenda est. Thank you.
Stuff, Jimmy. That was fantastic, as ever. He is a tireless promoter and advocate of Bitcoin. I've seen him in 3 continents in the past sort of 6 months, and he will be. Did I say it? Ah, what? Okay. It was over here. And he always has his books with him, so do get a signature in your BTC book of choice. Well done, mate. Scan that for 5,000 sats.